So now that we're done with westerns, it is time to move on to musicals. So the first question we have to ask and answer is, what is a musical? So a musical is best defined as a film that is built around music. Subtract the music and the film pretty much falls apart. So a musical with a lot of music is probably going to be better than one that doesn't have that much, but that pretty much goes without saying. So for the most part, the musical is not going to be restricted by the usual genre conventions. And as I talked about before, a convention is a rule. And when we talked about westerns, we had a set of rules and conventions that made a western a western. Now with a musical, time, it could be any. I mean, it could be set in the Old West if it wants to. You can have a western musical. That's possible. But it's not going to be defined by that. Place, musical can be anywhere, as long as people can sing and dance. Characters could be anyone. Subject matter could be anything. So rather than having this be tightly defined like it was with westerns, with a musical, it's pretty much wide open. The thing that really defines the genre is the singing and the dancing we're going to have, or singing or dancing. So the origins of the musical. So the movie musical came into existence at the same time as sound on film. You have to have sound in order to have a musical. So there's no such thing as a silent musical. And we'll actually be covering that a little bit more when we watch Singing in the Rain. The film is actually about that. So the first talkie, the first picture with sound on film, was The Jazz Singer from 1927. And that's also considered the first musical, though it doesn't have quite as much music as some of the later musicals. But it is about a performer, so we consider it to be a musical. Now, as sound filming techniques improved, and they were pretty rough to begin with, the filmmakers learned to liberate the musical from the stage and utilize new visual techniques. And by the early 1930s, the movie musical reached its mature form. That meaning they got over all the rough edges that they ran into when they were transitioning into sound, and we will see that in Singing in the Rain. And by the early 1930s, the musical was there. So it can be divided into five main forms, and we're going to be covering most of these in this part of the class. So there's the backstage musical, and the characters are usually going to be performers, and the narrative will revolve around the show. And whenever you have a musical sequence, it is kind of woven into the realistic fabric of the film. So 42nd Street's an example, and Gold Diggers of 1933. Then you have the musical comedy or dance musical. So characters and narrative are flexible. They could be pretty much anything. It's not devoted to a show being put on. But at dramatic moments, the words are not enough and the characters break into song and dance. So in these cases, most of the time, the performances are going to break from reality. So Singing in the Rain is a good example, and Swing Time, other movies we will be watching in this part of the class. Then we have the operetta. So this is like an opera, and most of you probably know what an opera is, but it's not in Italian. To be a true opera, it has to be in Italian. So an operetta is not in Italian, but every line in the movie is sung. So a good example is The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, which is a French film. Very interesting, very beautiful film, and every line in it is sung. It gets a little old after a while. Then we have the review, which is a compilation of musical sequences and performances that were popular. And this is a type of movie musical that kind of died out pretty early. But Hollywood Review of 1929 was an example. And then we have the rock opera, which is an opera with rock, but once again, not in Italian. So every line in a rock opera is going to be sung, and it will be sung in whatever language is appropriate, but it will also have rock music. So Tommy is a good example of that. So we want to focus on Busby Berkeley, who was an important and pivotal character in the origin of the musical. So he was a choreographer for the most part, and he designed the dances, and he was known primarily for his visual designs of his dance sequences. So he would have human jigsaw puzzles and kaleidoscopes and other geometric forms all made up of performers. So by the early 1930s, so this coincided with the musical really reaching its mature form, he reached his artistic and popular peak. So 42nd Street is a good example. He was the choreographer with that. Same thing with Gold Diggers of 1933. He also directed a few films, excuse me, as well. And Footlight Parade is another example. So very, very important and also very, very influential. So he also directed Gold Diggers of 1935 and designed dance sequences up until the early 1960s. So he was pretty busy designing these dances for a long time. So anytime anybody wanted a crazy dance sequence with tons of performers that just you didn't even know what you're looking at until you figured it out, um, they called Busby Berkeley. I think even the North Korean parades, I think, also were influenced greatly by Busby Berkeley. So the film for this lesson is Gold Diggers of 1933, which is from 1933. So arguably, at least in my opinion and some others, it is the best of the Gold Diggers series. There were some other Gold Diggers films as well. So it also features the popular romantic duo of Dick Powell and Ruby Keeler. They were popular performers of the early 30s and later, and they would often pair them together for various reasons. And also Ginger Rogers. She was, we'll see her in the next lesson with Fred Astaire, and they were a very popular dance partnership. But Ginger Rogers also was in the Gold Digger series as well. So the backstage segments detail the problems arising from a wealthy man's relationship with a dancing girl, referred to by the wealthy as a gold digger, and also the difficulties of putting on the big show during the Great Depression. Great Depression was not a time when a lot of people had money to put on big shows, but people seemed to need the big shows so they could feel better. So common backstage characters are going to be present, and you'll see this in a lot of the backstage musicals of the time. The flustered director, producer, trying to find his money. The struggling dancers, who are trying to find enough money to survive. The stuffy blue bloods who think they're better than the performers. The bumbling sugar daddy that the gold diggers take advantage of, etc. So you see a lot of these characters in these films. So enjoy Gold Diggers of 1933, and we'll talk in the next lesson.